So welcome everybody to tonight's meeting. Lovely to see you here in person, and welcome also to those online. Just to remind you, please, can you keep your camera turned off and your microphone muted? And just a little bit of housekeeping. Remember, if there is a fire alarm, please escape from the front entrance, turn left, and muster by the cafe. So very, very warm welcome to our guest speaker tonight, my baby brother, Dr. David Selwyn, who's very kindly agreed to come and talk to us, so which I'm delighted about. Thank you very much indeed. We have quite a lot of apologies, I'm afraid, tonight. Unfortunately, the meeting clashed with a board meeting, a Royal College of GPs faculty meeting tonight, so quite a few members couldn't come, so I do apologise for that. So we have Professor Claire Stewart, we have Marion Donald MacArthur, David Bogard, John Rawson, Bakula Patel, Marilyn Horner, Amina and Ali Hussein, Margaret Jones, Jenny Warner, Doug and Vicky Black, Paul Eddington. Before we go on, I do just want to announce, it's with great sadness that we have to announce the death of a long-standing MedChi member, Dr. Christopher Ryan, who was a former GP senior partner at Melbourne Park Medical Centre in Aspley in Nottingham. And he died, sadly, on the 3rd of March, age 79. And Chris was a long-serving trainer on the Nottingham VTS from its very early days. So obviously we send from the MedChi our sincere condolences to his family and friends. David. Yes, thank you very much, David. And if anybody wants any details of the funeral arrangements for Chris, please can they contact Alison at the on the admin email, admin@medchi.org.uk.
Sorry, I have to say.
Yeah, don't move there. So, moving swiftly on, so we had a super, minutes to last meeting, we had a super meeting with Professor Camilla Hawthorne. That was on the 12th of March. Stimulated great discussion and debate. One of my take-home messages from that was that one of the problems with the NHS at the moment is NHS England. And spookily, since then, we've had the head of the NHS England stepping down, or standing down, and also the medical director, Sir Steve Parr. So interesting. Don't think there are any particular matters arising to announce. No. The main thing I want to tell you about is some upcoming social events. So Sharon Scriven, who you probably know, is a retired urologist. She's going to lead the first of two Willow workshops, which is a 2-hour event here at the Postgraduate Centre, 10 to 12 p.m. On the Saturday. Please come with your own secateurs, gloves, and flask of coffee. And I'm led to believe that it will be great fun. She's going to do a second workshop on the 17th of May. So just some prior warning about that. And in fact, we had a small select group of us, didn't we, Caroline? Went to see one of the piano recitals last Sunday morning, which was absolutely fabulous at the Royal Concert Hall with coffee and cake and chat afterwards, and that was great. So food for thought for next year to repeat that. It was super. The only thing to report is that we have 3 new members, which is lovely. We've got Amina and Ali Hussein. They are GPs at the Jacksdale Surgery. And Jonathan, we are announcing you as a formal new member because you paid your money. Delighted to have you on board. I don't think there's anything, Angie, that you need to say. Is there anything? And Sue, is there anything you'd like to report? Well, we could report that, couldn't we? Oh, yes, we're very pleased to announce that. Oh, I thought, all right. No, it isn't. That's not the right one. No. They've given apologies. So, no, we're very pleased to announce that Donald MacArthur has agreed to become the president next year, which is super. I beg your pardon? Your husband is sitting next door to you, see?
Mary was delighted.
And as ever, just a reminder that my charity of the year is Doctors in Distress. So if anybody would like to donate, there is a Just Giving link, which you can point your phone at and donate easily. And if you could mark it with Meg Kai, that would be, and your name if you'd like to, that would be fantastic. So. Yeah. Thank you. Next lecture on the 30th of April is Dr. Jerry Dolan. Jerry used to work here as a consultant hematologist, and then he moved down to St. Thomas's, and he's been very involved in gene therapy and all sorts of specialist stuff to do with haemophilia, and he speaks internationally all about it. So I'm delighted that he's going to come and speak to us next time. His wife, in fact, was my GP partner, Susan, so that's why I managed to get him to come. So, without more ado, I shall introduce my brother David to give tonight's talk. Thank you very much, David.
Thanks very much, Jane. Good evening, everyone. Everyone hear me okay? Perfect. Hopefully online you can hear me. They'll probably tell you if they can hear all that. Okay, so over the next 40 minutes or so, I just want to try and get you to think differently about the perioperative care pathway. And what I want to do is I want to then perhaps see if you think that what I'm suggesting is so radical, so out there, so different that we have to put that into some form of future state, or whether it's so obvious, so easy, we should be doing it right now. So I'm speaking to you as the director of the Centre for Perioperative Care. Jane asked me to just give a few reflections on perhaps a little bit about my medical journey. Many of you in this room, I know, I blame all of my career on Peter Bull. I think he has a lot to answer for, but I do recognise that as I stand here before you, I do wear a number of different hats. So I obviously have a clinical background. I was appointed in 1996 as the 5th consultant in adult critical care to the Queen's Medical Centre, as it was then. And just at that time, intensive care medicine, critical care medicine was just starting out as a specialty. It was just on that journey. It hadn't quite established itself, but that was part and parcel of the journey. And because I was the 5th consultant, it was very easy. We all covered one day on the ITU. I was the last one in. I got Friday, every Friday. And those days we did a week on call. So we started on Friday morning. So I always did 8 days on call compared to everyone else's 7. And we got the weekend over. And then about Wednesday, I had no idea what sort of planet I was on. So this is medical training, Jonathan, as we like to call it in the old days. And of course, in those days when we started, I also did my parent specialty sessions. So I did anaesthetic sessions. So again, anaesthetising on the Wednesday afternoon. You can draw your own conclusion about that. But we did change that as part of my journey. And when I was appointed, the ITU at Queen's, that was around 10 beds. When I left 23 years later, we were up nearly 40 beds. So it was a different world. From those 5 consultants, we were up to about 26. Now I think we're about 36 or so. So I recognise that I'm also a bit of a rare beast. So I've made that leap of faith. Some people call it moving to the dark side. So initially when I started, I got very heavily in the educational side. I was a college tutor, and then I was a regional advisor, and we helped to launch the open up critical care medicine as a specialty to all the different disciplines. Prior to that, it had been purely the remit of anaesthesia. There was no training program, so we helped to establish all of that. And we did all sorts of strange things like dual CCTs and all sorts of nonsense in those days. I did that for about 7 or 8 years, and then after that I got tempted. I got tempted to step into a leadership role or a management role. And of course, a lot of those skills that you have from the educational side are transferable. And I became the lead clinician or head of service. Again, did that for about 7 years, and then went on through becoming a clinical director for one directorate, and then another directorate, and then a divisional director here in Nottingham before becoming deputy medical director. And then I moved up to Sherwood Forest on a secondment. And what happened at Sherwood Forest in many ways has surprised me. I actually left my clinical practice here. I took it up to Sherwood and moved to the ITU there at Kings Mill. And while I was doing the secondment as deputy medical director, the medical director there upped and left and went into the ICB, or the wider system. And so I got appointed as the medical director, and I did that for about 5.5 years or so. And then about 11 months ago, my chief executive, Paul Robinson here, received a cancer diagnosis, and so I had to step up as I was the deputy chief executive. I stepped up to cover his role, and I've been doing that. And very sadly, Paul died about 3 weeks ago, which was a surprise to us. It wasn't what we were expecting from his journey, his treatment, and we were anticipating he would be rejoining us in some shape or form round about Easter, but sadly that wasn't to be. So I'm now the acting medical director and have been for, as I say, for about 11 months there at Sherwood. And just a little bit of a reflection on that. So when I started all of this, there are about 7% of acute trust CEOs were medically qualified. I thought that was awful. I told everyone I could find that was rubbish. And then someone said to me, you better do something about it. So now the latest data is about 18% of acute trust CEOs are medically qualified. But 85% of those have been appointed in the last 5 years. So it's a relatively new change that we've seen from that. Just going back to perhaps my clinical background, whilst I can sort of appear on many fly-on-the-wall documentaries, and it's great fun, and this is quite a few years ago, really, as many of us in this room, I carry quite a few patients with me. I think I always will. And so this was one of the first ones, a young lad, Alex Reed, 17-year-old. He came in with glandular fever. We didn't make that diagnosis. We thought he had sepsis. We gave him 10 litres of crystalloid, but actually he had a spontaneous rupture of his spleen, and he died. And this was the view from the coroner, that perhaps if we had been involved earlier in that, we might have changed that. And then don't ever try and help your colleagues by saying, yeah, I'll do your weekend on call. Friday evening, 5:30 in the evening, we managed to bring a patient who we'd injected vincristine into his spine. And over that weekend, I became a world expert on vincristine poisoning. And as well as telling his parents that he would die, I had to try and counsel some of our colleagues who had been involved in this. And then moving a bit further on, we'd done some developments at our ITU, and it was Valentine's Day, just the early hours. I went home about 5:30 in the morning. It'd been a pretty torrid night on call. I think it was a Sunday night. And I got home, I'd settled the unit down, I was comfortable with all of the patients. One patient I was worried about, but he turned the corner, was much better. A young lad, he had swine flu. You remember swine flu in those days? Not that long ago. Anyhow, he turned the corner. I got home, I was deeply asleep in my REM sleep, 45 minutes or so later after I'd left the unit, and I got phoned to say that I got given a jumper for Valentine's Day. And what had happened was he barricaded the door, ripped out all of his lines, smashed the window with an oxygen bottle and jumped out of the window from a 3-story where the ITU was at Queen's. So I had to come back in, and of course couldn't get into the hospital because the police were blocking all the roads. So that wasn't really very helpful. Trying to institute a major trauma call outside in the pavement was also difficult, but we got him to theatre and he survived. I was really irritated. The unit was full. He'd destroyed one of our very special and precious side rooms, and I had no room for him. And I had to try and make or accommodate him after his trip in theatre, but he did survive. When I reported this was, to my understanding, the first UK case of acute psychosis suicide from Tamiflu. And there have been 5 other cases, but all in Japanese young adolescents. So as always, there's lots to learn from medicine. And then this patient was the start of the brave new world that we've entered in with medicine. This is where I saw this injuries before I saw the patient by many hours, and that's the role of social media. So I'll see if I can get this to play. You have probably seen this before.
Who is, of course, Jamie Caroline's team, one of the 4 Carling cars. Here's Billy Munger having a look through past his Jamie Sharp, goes through on the inside line, so up into 13th place.
You can see they're all scrabbling around for grip. Oh,
no.
it's on! Oh, that's horrendous. That's absolutely enormous. He just couldn't.
And I knew he needed an ITU bed as soon as I saw that. So he destroyed both of his lower limbs. When I saw him, we made the decision to amputate those to save his life because of the torrential bleeding. And Billy was an absolute inspiration. He was a 17-year-old lad, and he was amazing, amazing. So he was really inspiring, so dedicated, so keen to get back to racing. And he became a real ambassador for NUH. And of course, he went on to have a successful career. I'm sure you've seen him commentating Formula 1. He went back to racing. This was him. He wasn't old enough to drink, so I did it for him. And then, of course, we had a nice trip to the Sports Personality of the Year Awards, where he won the Helen Ronaldson Award for his dedication. And those of you who follow Comic Relief will know that he's about to appear in a documentary next year around the Ironman challenge. Sorry, next week. Anyhow, that wasn't what I was here to talk about. That was the sort of buffing, if you like. I'm here to talk about the Centre for Perioperative Care. And this was an initiative we started out of, hosted and largely funded out of the Royal College of Anaesthetists just under 6 years ago. And in effect, this was an initiative that put the patient right at the centre of our thinking of the whole surgical journey. And it was an opportunity to rethink that journey, to redesign that journey. It does cut across backlogs, it cuts across the need for a more blended modern workforce. It cuts across that desire to have transformational change at pace. And it also cuts across those health inequalities, that prevention agenda, and of the levelling up of the NHS. But in reality, it's putting the patient at the centre of our thinking. And it's that paradigm shift that we're not very good at in the NHS, about thinking about pathways rather than specialties. A very different way of thinking. And we've achieved huge amounts over the last 5 or 6 years. CPOC now is a preeminent voice of perioperative care across the UK. It's the global voice of perioperative care. And that's because we bring the professional voice, the voice of the clinicians. And the strength of that is because we're a partnership and we have some very high value professional stakeholders who sit around our board table. And if you look at those names there, we've got a strong surgical voice. We've got the English Royal College, which has also got one of the Scottish Royal Colleges. But we've got other members of the workforce, the Royal College of Nursing, the Association for Perioperative Practice, the College of ODPs. And then, of course, we've got the Royal College of Physicians and Faculty of Public Health. And it's that strength, that breadth, that helps us to drive some of the changes that we've made. And below the board, we have what we call an advisory group. Again, interested societies or professional bodies. And we encourage them to be our test bed, our think tank, if you like, where we bounce ideas and try and direct policy. But also within that group, a lot of arm's length bodies, a lot of patient-centered groups or third sector groups. So what are we trying to fix? Well, Steve Powers, Sir Steve Powers, who has announced his retirement recently. It's not just Amanda Pritchard who's gone, it's the whole of the NHSE board who've now gone, apart from the Chief People Officer. She's a bit lonely. Sorting out severance pays, I should think. But what are the 2025 problems? Well, it's something about squeezing ill health into a shorter period at the end of life. It's about having new models of care, being agile learning organisations, moving from that traditional reactive to a more proactive or predict and provide approach. It's about utilising an agile workforce. It's about looking after your workforce. 35% of our tasks in medicine can be automated, recognising that digital will transform how we work. And of course, it's tackling those challenges that developing the community as carers, perhaps that new workforce that cuts across social care and healthcare. And then at the same time, it's changing that conversation. It's recognising that patients are partners in all of this, but it's educating ourselves, it's educating our colleagues, and it's educating and changing that societal expectations. And so we set up a strategy before those problems were suggested, and luckily it rather mirrors all of that. And so CPOC potentially is a change vehicle to institute many of those things that we need to do. And of course, we've got Lord Darcy's report, the diagnosis of the problems of the NHS, and then we have our new friends. So we've got Wes talking about the triple shift, the hospital to community, the analog to digital, and the sickness to prevention. And again, we can use CPOC, we can use perioperative care as a vehicle to change much of this. This is our new leader in town. This is Sir Jim Mackey, the Chief Executive of Newcastle, and he's taking over from an Amanda Pritchard later on this month. So what are we trying to fix? Well, we did this infographic about a year ago, and it depends where you look at that. If you look at the top line, you can see the enormous tsunami that we've got coming our way. The elderly, the frail elderly, the impact that we have. If you look on the left-hand side, you see that change in how we deal with our patients, that actually patients want to be involved in their care and how we treat them. And then if you look on the right, you think, well, actually, what about those influencing or modifiable factors? We've all talked about this for a long time, but these are things we truly have to tackle. And then right at the bottom, if like me, you're someone who's worried about the money, a huge sums of money that we can do by doing this change. It doesn't need new money, it just needs the money to flow differently and us to do it better. So how do you institute perioperative care? It's dead simple. You do some simple things. They're listed there. It's probably 6 Ps. It's actually planning, preparation. It's partnership, it's patience, it's performance, it's perfection. But the bit I want you to look at is in that top grey box, those 7 influenceable things that we can do, that we need to concentrate on. Smoking, exercise, nutrition, alcohol, medication review, senior review, psychological preparation, mental health optimization, and practical preparation. Those are the ways that we can have that seismic change of the outcomes of patients. And we all know what good care looks like. We know that doing some preparation, even fancy words like rehabilitation, enhanced recovery after surgery or ERAS, and then putting the patient in the right post-operative environment. We know that works well, but we also know what bad looks like. Bad for our patients, bad for us as clinicians, and bad for our organisations. 4% of our hospital population consume 43% of our resources. Those are the patients, the complications that we need to prevent, we need to get better at. We need to have to change, to think differently, to set up our pathways, to set up our systems, such that we've got that new model of care, that agile learning organisation, and think about pathways, not specialties. And at the same time, we've also got to take our patients on a bit of a journey, and they've got to expect this. So it's about influencing from the top down, from the clinical front line, but also asking the patients to demand this. And we've looked at all the evidence. We looked at 58,000 pieces of evidence when we started all this, and we can show that a good perioperative pathway shaves 1 to 2 days off your hospital length of stay. We can show that we can reduce your complications by around about 35 to 40% just from doing some simple things. And that mindset change, I always like showing this to my surgical colleagues, is about how we think differently, that we need to change that concept that it's all about the surgery and actually think that surgery is just a component of the pathway, not the be-all and end-all. I wrote this a few years ago now, and again, this is that paradigm shift and on how we think, but it's the power of language. So this is about changing the terminology from waiting lists to preparation lists. The politicians love it, as you can imagine. It's a soundbite they take and run with. But actually, it's thinking about how we do things differently. None of this is new. None of this is new. It's just about doing it repetitively, consistently, to a good standard. All of those things, I suspect we would say that will make a difference. But I'm going to dwell on a few of them. So lifestyle modification, what we can do about that? Well, that comes back to Wes and one of his triple shifts. And he's quite honest about it. He says we need to cure our sick society. The news today is all about the benefits and what number of people on benefits. We need to cure our sick society. We need to change that. We've got to have those conversations. So where I work up in Mansfield, that's the 6th most deprived ICB in the country. We have horrific areas of deprivation. But actually, when we think about all of this, when we talk to Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, it's not just the deprivation, it's actually about the life expectancy, but the healthy life expectancy. And look at that difference that our patients are having in our deprived areas, perhaps compared to places south of the river in Rushcliffe. What can we do about that? Well, I spent all of my clinical time, trying to decide whether noradrenaline was better than dobutamine or penicillin was better than ampicillin. Who knows? All of those clinical conversations. And that's a tiny % difference on that quality of care aspect. But I can make tens of % difference if I actually turn myself into a public health doctor and start to think, actually, change what our patients do, change how our patients think. And that understanding the wider determinants of health, those aspects, where are those in our medical education? That's a question for Jonathan, obviously. But in terms of prevention and health inequalities, why am I banging on about this? Well, 42% of that burden of poor health is preventable. And you look at those factors, and it's the same 7 factors that I've called out earlier. It's alcohol, it's smoking, it's obesity, it's diet, all of those aspects. And I'm not a health economist, but actually what I know is that we're writing checks that we can't afford. Somehow, 4% of our working population is going to have to support 37%. Again, it comes back to that sick society. This isn't something that we can continue, or the health service is doomed. But to do all of this, we've got to make a change. We've got to actually get involved in the patients as early as we possibly can. And many of you working in primary care, you'll go, well, how can I get involved in all of this? So there's a confusion that we have about pre-assessment, about preoperative and perioperative. They all begin with P, but they're all very different. And whilst I might say, well, I want to get involved in the preoperative side of things, in reality, I want to get involved right at the point of referral to support that clinical decision making to help with that. And so we've developed on our website a series of resources for our patients. It's a very patient-centered website. They can click on all of these and get help about their nutritional guidance, alcohol modification, what we can do, what patients can do, but also what you as clinicians can do. And we all think we do shared decision making, don't we? We think we're good at it. We're not. We're rubbish. So 1 in 7 patients don't want the operation when you talk to them. But actually, if you put a patient with abdominal aortic aneurysm in front of a geriatrician and you have a risk-based discussion, then actually 24% of them don't proceed with the operation. So take out 24% of our abdominal aortic surgery. That's a massive saving. And 70% of those patients who die at 1 year don't die from anything to do with the vascular disease. So do we truly apply that benefits, risks, alternatives, nothing, the Bran approach in our shared decision making? Do any of us have time to do that? Or do we need to change how we work such that we make time if this is so important? But what about the money? Look at this, litigation, £42 million just by not doing the wrong operation. It's all about the right operation at the right time for the right patient. Or just don't replace their knees when they don't need being replaced. 50 to 100 million pounds. There is real money in here to make this change. And I bang on a bit about smoking. So the smoking cessation rate is stuck at 13%. It's been stuck at 13% for everyone. It costs the NHS around £3.6 billion, but the loss to the economy is around £18 billion. So I'm an anaesthetist by trade, by background. Every single patient I ever anaesthetised, I said to them, do you smoke? They said yes. So what? What did I do? Pick a smoker. How many of those patients do we refer into a smoking cessation clinic as anaesthetists? Less than 3% nationally. Okay, but 50% of those patients want to give up smoking. If you put them into a smoking cessation, there's lots of examples where 12-month smoking cessation clinic showed a 46% reduction in smoking. They all stopped, sorry, not reduction, stopping smoking, 36% reduction in smoking, and that was continued. These people want to give up. We've got to signpost, we've got to put them in the right place. It's everywhere. It's a bit like climate change. We all think someone else is doing it, don't we? We think, oh, it's in someone else's job description, as opposed to it's in all of our job descriptions. But actually, to do some of these things, you've got to have the resources. So you've got to be able to have those conversations. We're not very good, are we, as doctors, about, well, actually, how can I stop you smoking? How many times do we walk outside the hospital and say to the people outside there having a fag, actually, let's put you into smoking cessation or get you some nicotine replacement patches? Okay, so we've developed some resources to help with that, about ask, advise, and then act on that. And the evidence is there. I can present all evidence in terms of support all this, but this is a meta-analysis showing that actually these tobacco cessation interventions work and are sustainable. But of course, it's not just smoking. What about our diet? So is it any wonder when we sit on the sofa and we watch TV that's on demand via Netflix, we order our food via Uber Eats, and it comes to us, and then our shopping gets delivered to us. We never actually have to go out now, and we wonder why we've got a bit of a problem. This is a study that was published last year. 185 countries between the ages of patients between the ages of 3 and 19, and it shows an increase in sugar intake by 23%. And spookily, it mirrors the rise in prevalence of obesity among the population. And those graphs on the left-hand side, the key bit about those graphs is the enormous increase during that time across those areas where you think would be non-traditional. So Southeast, East Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa. This isn't a Western world problem. This is a world problem. But we think we're so smart, don't we? We can make that all better. Let's do something really clever. Let's do neoadjuvant GLP therapy and a bit of surgery or a bit of medicine, and let's treat it and show great demand. Well, actually, why don't we grasp that true nettle and have that conversation that maybe we need to challenge what people are eating, challenge what we're supplying people. And what about new models of care? This is really old data. This is original GIRF data. It's about 11 years old now. Just looking at patients undergoing colorectal cancer resection. That's a scattergram. No matter where you go and have your operation, your outcomes are hugely variable. The same if you're going attempting to do it laparoscopically. We need to organize ourselves differently. Can we do that? Well, yes, we can. Here's an example, a standardized approach, preoperatively, intraoperatively, and postoperatively. It requires a mindset change by anaesthetists and surgeons, and it shows a reduction in length of stay. It shows a reduction in complications. It shows an improvement in patient satisfaction. We can do this. Why aren't we doing it? And I challenge myself. I like writing guidelines. It's great. I can write these lovely guidelines here. These are perioperative care guidelines. They're right from primary care referral all the way through to recovery. They're very different guidelines. So the anemia guideline has sections for GPs. The diabetes guidelines has sections for GPs. Very different. And that's great. But actually, I'm standing here giving you a talk with 40 slides by PowerPoint. Doctors of today, if it's not 19 seconds on TikTok, they're not learning. Why am I doing it here like this? Why aren't we learning about that? And so actually, when was the last time I challenged myself and said, what is the impact of your guideline, Dave? What difference did it make? All of us in our professional work will have done SOPs or guidelines. So what? What's the difference it's made? What's that challenge? We had real difficulties in the in CPOC. So we've got the Royal College of GPs as a board member had real difficulties engaging the Royal College of GPs. And of course, we all know why. We're too busy. It's going to add to our work. We're trying to help you. We're trying to give you less work, but you've got to do things differently. Now, the College of GPs has recognised that prevention is a key part of providing healthcare. And so they've set up a group with preventative medicine right at the start, and they're heavily involved in what we're trying to do. But only recently have we managed to do that. Within Nottingham, we've tried to set up a group looking at perfect referrals. It hasn't really worked in the way I wanted it to work. It's not kicking off, but that's what we have to do. We have to work across those traditional barriers. Why have we got barriers? Why do we call it primary care? Why do we call it secondary care? Why don't we just call it care? But we've got to work together so that actually the referrer who's seeing the patient can talk to a surgeon and say, I'm not sure about this. This was a study that came out of GIRF. It was a pilot study. It's just been repeated. It's got the same sort of results, looking at patients who came in, cancelled on the day of surgery, around 10%. Huge amount of money here, huge amount of waste. But 62% of those patients who were cancelled on the day had medical reasons that could have been optimized before they come in, if we'd set them up and seen them properly. And of those, by far, the vast majority was diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes. And we can put out guidelines about why people sugars are high, and we can suggest what they do. But actually, if you set up a different type of service, not in secondary care, not in primary care, but bridging across that, a waiting well service, where you have someone who actually supports that patient with their diabetes management, with their diet, with their education. And what you can show is that their use of insulin, so this is off the insulin technology, the Libra technology that many patients have now, but what the yellow bars are is basically spikes in their sugars. And you can show by having this waiting well pathway, you can reduce that massively. A program, and then they come to surgery and then they don't get the complications. Why aren't we doing things like that? Well, actually, here's another reason. They didn't increase their sugars. This wasn't a changing their medication. They showed a reduction in their insulin use. Sorry, they didn't increase their insulin usage. Showed a reduction in their insulin usage. They saved over 500 insulin pens a year by doing this, by changing patients' behaviours, not by medicalising their behaviours. And prehabilitation is the current trendy word I'm sure you've heard about. In effect, I spent my whole life looking after patients who came to us without prehabilitation, and they never quite got back to their level of baseline or dependence. But actually, you can put some, if you engage patients and you put some effort in, you can get them to put some bank in the, or petrol in the tank, or extra money in the bank, and they'll come through their operation better. Lots of studies looking at all of this. In effect, all of them shave about 1 to 2 days off the pathway for complex procedures. But some of the work that came out of Nottingham, they did about 1,000 patients here. Some of the work came out was the importance of the psychological preparation. Actually, particularly patients who are going through cancer treatment, being mentally prepared, having some help, made a massive difference, not just to how they felt, but to their outcomes. And again, this is a paper that's just been produced showing the impact of prehabilitation. This isn't prehabilitation. There's optimization, but this is specific prehabilitation targeted for specific patients. And then what about moving into the modern world? What about wearable technology? So this is it's not a randomized study, so you've got to take it with a pinch of salt. But this was patients having thoracic surgery, wearing Apple Watches, and showing that actually if you put them through an exercise program, their outcomes were better. So we've got to change that societal message, that paradigm shift. I hate going for a run. Hate it. I feel great afterwards. What's that all about? We've got to get Taylor Swift's PR company into exercise, haven't we? We've got to change that message so that actually it's the thing we all have to do, despite us not really liking it. We've really got to challenge ourselves around that and get that for our patients. And Scarlett came here a few months ago to talk about exercise, and this is one of the publications that she wrote. I'm sure she mentioned that. But actually, if we are not talking to our patients and we're supporting our patients with simple educational material, then we're missing a trick with all of that. I went up and spoke at the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine. Anyone ever been to that conference? 5,500 people. What? I've never been before. Talking about exercise, diet. Huge numbers of GPs, huge numbers of secondary care doctors, huge numbers of therapists. Amazing audience. Such a buzz. They're making this is a motion. This is a movement making a huge difference. They are really switched on. They release a video, gets seen by 60,000 people. I release a video, gets seen by 6 people. We need to harness that different way of thinking. This is some work we did with Joe Wicks. This is an 86-year-old patient down at Guy's and St Thomas, and we did some specific bespoke exercise. You can exercise when you're 86. You can make a difference. That video is out on Joe Wicks' website. He was really taken with all of this. And then what about that other end of the pathway? We are absolutely rubbish with discharge. I suspect anyone from primary care will know that. We are really rubbish with it. So how can we help with that? Well, some of that is about talking to our patients. Actually, give people some resources. And so we've just published all of this. What to ask about, what to think about. Have you got your charger downstairs in the room so you don't have to go upstairs when you've had your operation and think when your phone's running out? Have you got your shoehorn ready? Is your fridge full of food? Who's looking after your pets? All of those sort of things. What can you do to get ready? But also, what can you do as a clinician? Now, it's really hard to write this for clinicians because it turns out as actually what you're trying to do is write about medicine. Think, do the right things, be curious. But you can't really put that in a little booklet, so you've got to be a bit careful about it. But the patients have got to understand that their journey, whilst it says there it might be seamless and simple, it isn't. There may be many twists and turns about it. It's about that safety netting and who to call and all of those sort of aspects. So we put all of that out for them, but to give them simple things to set those expectations, simple to-do list to help them with all of that. And we can get smarter. I call this smart operating. So I've talked about our deprivation in our area. I know if I do a list of 4 hip replacements and they've all got terrible deprivation and comorbidities, the list will overrun. I'll cancel one of them So maybe I need to get better and think about perhaps not doing 4 people from who've got terrible comorbidities and doing smart operating. So this is real-time dashboards and now available. We've got something like this similar in Nottingham. This is actually from Newcastle, but it tells you the operation, tells you the deprivation index, it tells you the comorbidities, it helps you plan properly. But the gold dust in this is, so what then happens to the patient? What's their length of stay? What's their complication rate? And then how can you influence that? And AI is a savior to everything, isn't it? Large language models, it's going to be perfect. Of course it's not. But using technology is key to what we've got to do. And we've got to get better at that. And we've got to get better at concentrating perhaps not on the 10% of patients who aren't very good with technology and concentrate on the 90% of patients who are very good at technology. And then that workforce that we need for the future, it's got to be a different sort of workforce, very different to the traditional surgical workforce or anaesthetic workforce. It needs to cut across lots of different barriers. Communication is key to that, but actually health inequalities is not a key skill that we address or talk about. This is the data that came out of the Darzi report. I'm sad I read the Darzi report, and this looked at, in effect, this is the NHS efficiency, because what's happened is we've removed the discretionary effort as a result of the pandemic. That's no surprise to us, is it really? But actually, we now are getting what we pay for, and we're just having to say, well, that is very expensive, and it's a marked change. And so, from my role, I mean, compared to 2019 or 2022, and saying, why aren't we the same? Because there's a different cohort of patients. It's a different workforce. It's a different world. The same for sickness. When you're all young and just qualified, who went off sick? You never went off sick. I'm on the unit, the IT unit, it's Christmas Day, and the registrar phones in and says, I'm not feeling very well. Would you ever do that? It's commonplace now. Someone else's problem. And this is, again, what we're seeing out of the Darzi report. And some of this is about educating. This is the Lumley Library of the Royal College of Surgeons in England. It's nice. That's the alumni of a couple of years ago. But actually, the perioperative workforce is very different. They need different skills to what we traditionally teach them. They need to be very patient-focused, put that patient at the centre. We've developed a curriculum in conjunction with old HEE, new NHSE brackets education, a perioperative care medical curriculum that is now ready to go. Unfortunately, with the imploding of NHSE, it's all a bit stuck at the moment. But we've designed all of that. It gives the key skills, key competencies there to have a perioperative care medical workforce. We've also got a curriculum that's an allied health professional nursing workforce that's finished but is stalled with the current furor around PAs and AAs and all of those blended workforce models. We've also developed a non-medical workforce curriculum, which is for perioperative care coordinators who are not, as I say, non-medical, sort of at the band 4 level. But actually, we have to grasp this a bit of a nettle, and we have to truly challenge our masters about having a true workforce model that we need to go for, because this has to be what we develop across there. So what about perioperative pathways for the start? Well, that's easy. 20% of the operations that we do are related to the paediatric population. We forget that. The paediatricians desperately want perioperative care because they feel it should be for every patient, not focused on patients. You think about the patients who've got learning difficulties, the autism patients, they need a very different pathway to conventional patients. Often they have 30 operations. That first operation sets the tone. If it goes well, you're all right. If it goes badly and they're held down screaming, that's a nightmare for their life, for their parents' life. And then, of course, we've talked about the tsunami that is the frailty or the age that's coming there. In the middle, try and encourage society to live better, live better. So 62% of our acute beds are now occupied by patients over 65 years. This is data that I just pulled out of the RICB. This is Nottinghamshire data focused on where I work, looking at the forecast growth population for over the next 10 years or so. You don't really need to read it. It just doesn't look good. You don't need to read it. This is long-term conditions, but pretty much everything is going up by around about 20–25%. Definitely not good. So that challenge to us, that societal conversation, we produced this just before the election. This was a simple document to try and encourage politicians who were running for Parliament to get into this space and have this conversation. It was simple things. It was turning waiting lists into preparation lists. It was thinking about enhanced recovery. There's good evidence around that. And it was about thinking about proper discharges. But we've got to really get into this space and have these conversations. It's only the medical fraternity that can do this. And whilst I can influence and try, I think this is something that we all have to do. So, perioperative care, is it that tricky? Is this something that we've got to put into the next generation? Or is this something that we should be doing? Just going to give you a couple of final thoughts, just to feedback on the leadership bit, okay? And then happy to take a few questions. So, final thoughts. I've done this for a long time. Someone said to me, it's quite lonely being a consultant. It's even more lonely being a medical director. It's even more lonely being a chief executive. Asking for help is not a weakness. I do it all the time. That's what we should do. It's what we do as clinicians, by and large. Diversity is a strength, inclusivity essential. That mindset, actually, how you respond to those knockdowns, just defines you in terms of your resilience. And then the importance of kindness. There are lots of top tips. Every day is school day. I learn every single day. I lead people. I don't manage things. And I can't be the head of an organization sitting behind a desk. I need to go out and have cups of tea and cake. That's a saying out of the forces. And then you've got to be prepared to have those difficult conversations, but you've got to listen in those difficult conversations. Don't go in fixed with your mind. Look the part. I put a suit on for you. I even put a tie on for you today. Be professional. And how you respond to feedback. Don't be shy to actually say how things are going. And then finally, lead by example. Get some mates around you. You can't lead on your own. Stick to your values. Really important. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right. If it's a bad decision, it will feel a bad decision. And trust those around you. There's nothing better than watching those people around. It's fascinating, isn't it? Politicians, what do we do in medicine? I try and appoint people who are better than me. I think I'm so proud when people sort of come through. It's like I'm a proud father. Give them a little bit of watering, they grow, they flourish. It's the best thing in the world. Politicians, they surround themselves by people who are inferior to them, don't they? Because they're worried they're going to take their job if they're better than them. How weird is that? No wonder we're in so much trouble. Knockdowns, we talked about that, and coming back to that compassion. So be kind to yourself about this. You can learn it all from a book. These are my books. The majority of these books are not read. So some of it is about doing it. And there are some books I like better than others. Thanks very much.
David, thank you for a great summary. I was really struck by your patients you take with you, rural adolescents. And I think this is an important element of how education in medicine has been presented to the trainees, in that they haven't always grasped the importance of how development alters the way you interact in health. And those 4 teenagers who all had their crises were adolescents on the verge of adulthood. And it's an area of medicine where we could do a lot better, and we've learned a lot actually already. We're already making progress. But I just wondered whether you've reflected on that in your leadership role.
So funnily enough, when I was driving here and I was thinking about the talk and I was running through it, I thought, oh, they're all 17, 18 years old, and I hadn't quite appreciated it. To be honest with you, I could have picked a different cohort, but all those patients made the news in some shape or form. So I could have talked about other patients, but I think one of the things that I will reflect from my time. So I think one of my regrets, if you like, around adult critical care is how poor we are, and none of these patients apply to it, but how poor we are at transitioning patients. So increasingly we have patients who come through the pediatric intensive care unit, and they are very dependent, and parents have suffered and supported these patients, and then they come into at 18 we say, or they transitioned, they meet some adult clinicians for the first time who are very often not as receptive to their needs, and I think that is poor in all shapes or form. And so I've been quite keen, and we've now established across the system a transition group to help with that. It's been a real difficult journey to do, but we've got that. And certainly in my own hospital, we've also got a well-established group now, multidisciplinary group, looking at, for example, those ventilator-dependent pediatric patients who then end up on an adult critical care unit. But it's a real gap, I think, in our health provision.
I might say that all the structures you put could easily help all of that just by people following your procedures and suggestions, because it's about engaging with the person and finding out how they want to take part in the health program you're offering them and listening to them. And so I think you're saying all the right messages.
Thank you.
Well, David, you spoke rather jokingly about a small part I might have played in your early career, but I actually now feel quite proud that I am part of your career. I think you've done wonderfully well. And I just feel frustrated that the good work that you are advocating in this lecture, but who's listening? Are enough people listening, and are they going to do what you and others like you are advocating?
Yeah, so in the wee small hours, sometimes I think, why on earth am I banging on saying to this, who's listening? And then we make some really significant steps. So what's become clear, I think, in medicine over the last 5 or 6 years, many of you will remember things like sequins and best practice tariffs, where there was a carrot, if you like, to organizations to do something that was seen as good. And they were given a ring fence amount of money, and then after a period, usually about 2 years, that was then taken away, because the belief was that it became embedded in the organization, that everyone recognized it was a good way to, it was a good thing to do for patients. ERAS was a perfect example of that. The enhanced recovery took off, was done really well when they had nurses who actually went around and monitored these patients and encouraged it all. As soon as the funding was removed from them, and they all went, it dropped and died a death. But NHS England and whoever's going to replace NHS England realise that actually it is short-term this, and it's not the way to change behaviours. And so they are very keen to change behaviours in a different way. And it's been a bit frustrating, because I'm quite keen to say, or I have said to them, all of them, please mandate perioperative care, just do it. And they're not prepared to do that. But what they are prepared to do is to work with us. And so there are three big voices now that are driving this. There's us as the professional voice. And so we've got a network, we've got a perioperative care lead in every single acute organisation across 4 nations. So that's great. So we can get the frontline clinicians there. We can be the professional voice. So we have, if you like, trust with the clinicians, and we're fighting their battle. We're then using NHS England to change some of the commissioning side of things. And so we've got a whole series of commissioning mandates, and the elective care reform has quite a strong section that came out in January, quite a strong section on perioperative care. It's coming. They won't do it in a big bang, but it is coming. And then within the sort of 2 groups is also the work that Girth are doing in terms of the unwarranted clinical variation and trying to change that and challenge that. So it is coming. It is slowly changing. I think there have been some huge seismic changes, really. Prehabilitation is one where now there is irrefutable evidence that this is a good thing to do. Macmillan is about to release its new guidelines on prehabilitation, which shows that in terms of cancer patients. So it is coming, but it does take a while. And part of this is you know, it's easy for me to stand here and say this is a way to do transformational change that's better for patients, it's better for the healthcare, it's better for clinicians. Why wouldn't we want to do it? But actually, what we have to do is we have to dual run this. We have to change this pathway at the same time we're meeting all of the constituent standards and the targets and things like that. And that's the difficult bit for trusts, to get that mindset, that headspace. But I think going into 25, 26 and beyond, the funding is such that we have to see this transformational change. So I think it may accelerate and come quicker. So I'm a bit more hopeful. But people have been talking about health inequalities and prevention agenda forever. I've turned into a public health doctor.
Sue.
So I think in obstetrics and gynecology, which was my specialty, as you well know, we're probably better at this sort of thing in obstetrics, where high-risk people get a pre-op anaesthetic review. Probably a lot more rubbish in gynae, but this is happening at Kingsmill, right? So I know it's happening at Kingsmill. Very disappointed to see the RCOG are not on your board. However, the president would like to know more. So
there was a little prompt to Sue.
She's going to give me a call to find out more. Can I just put her in touch with you tomorrow?
Yeah,
I think really we are surgeons, you know, as well as physicians.
As you know, I've nagged Eddie a bit.
So the current president would like to speak to you, I think.
That's great. Welcome that.
Great.
That was a superb lecture, thank you. Do you think the appointment of physician associates is a move in the right direction, or is it something that concerns you?
Great question. Love that.
And anaesthetist assistants as well.
So I can answer that on many different fronts. I think I've always enjoyed working in a team. So within critical care, if the nurses don't agree with it, it ain't going to happen, irrespective of what you say about the management of the patient. So the team approach, I think, is the way that medicine should be run, if you like. All of the blended roles that I've been involved with, the people have been great. We developed advanced nurse practitioners or critical care practitioners on critical care a long time ago. I found it actually quite refreshing working with them on call. I remember it was a bit of a seismic change for me, thinking, how's this going to go? But what happened was they went and saw a patient within certain guidelines. They came back, they told you about it. You said, go and do this. They went and did that. And then they came back and it worked or it didn't work. And you got good communication, you got very good care. And I was very happy with it. The difficulty with some of our medical teams is sometimes they go off a bit off-piste, and you're not entirely sure what they're doing or where they're doing it. In terms of the educational side of things, I mean, Jonathan may want to comment on it, but there is clearly significant upset amongst the training grades of medicine. And a lot of this started within anaesthesia, and there is a real problem with anaesthetists. There's about 1,900 anaesthetists short in the country currently, and that's despite lots of people wanting to do it. There aren't quite enough of the significant hurdles in all of that. And so they saw in this workforce plan that there was going to be a big investment in these blended roles, or PAAs, physicians associates, anaesthesia, and that they felt was a risk to their training and what their opportunities. I'm not sure I saw it that way. I didn't think that actually organisations, and speaking from a chief executive or medical director point of view, there was no way I was going to suddenly appoint 100 PAAs. I might appoint 1 or 2, but it wasn't going to be a massive threat. And actually, it was all about supporting our trainees and ensuring that they got a better training and they did the right things, perhaps. I think the other thing I might say to myself is no shortage of work. There is no shortage of work. So if we're not going to have a blended workforce, what's the plan B? Who's going to do it? Because we haven't got enough medics to do it. So for me, I think that is the future, but it has to be dealt with very carefully. It's clearly very politically sensitized at the moment. Social media is a bear pit around all of this, but I think there's a lot to be said for it.
I won't comment on PAs apart from saying I'm in favour of them. But how do you instill some of this perioperative and preventative stuff into undergraduate medical curriculum? How do you convince our students actually what goes on around and before and after the operation is as crucial as the operation itself?
Yeah, and there's a few things in there. So I do enjoy some of my conversations with the university when I tell them that it drives me nuts that they decide what sort of students or what doctors of the future I want as the biggest employer in Mansfield or the biggest employer in Nottingham, without perhaps consulting and talking about that. I think doctors, you know better than me, doctors of today are very different of the way we were. And you know, the joke about TikTok is absolutely right, isn't it? They need a different skill set. So I do interact with the various undergraduate bodies and the national undergraduate bodies to do that. And there is quite a move for perioperative care in terms of getting that. But this is, I think the key bit is about pathway side of things and actually seeing medicine in a different way and seeing disease in a different way. And I think that's the challenge. They are receptive to it, but it's a bit slow progress.
Hi, yeah, two comments. Firstly, about medical students. We've worked really hard at Nottingham. I mean, I've been finished a few years now, but for over 20 years, I was on the admissions panel. I stayed there as a GP and associate professor because we want to be very pragmatic about the type of person that we employ for a long-term career, because that's the workforce planners. And the admissions team, led by Mandy Hampshire, needs people like yourself and your contemporary and your colleagues to make sure that we're making the right decisions. And it's evolving all the time. That's the first thing. The second thing was public health doctors, public health profession. As a GP and senior partner for many years, we employed a public health doctor stroke GP, jointly qualified, because we thought this would be very useful. They are so few and far between. The whole system's been disintegrated from about 2013. Yeah. And now most of the public health senior people are not medical. And they don't have the breadth and the understanding that the medics do. And I don't quite know what can be done about that, because it was just, cut off at the root, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with both those comments.
To those of you that are advocating PAs and AAs, biggest problem in medical training at the minute is that the trainees are all tiddling off to Australia, Canada and New Zealand, because they're extremely fed up at seeing their roles being usurped by PAs, AAs and other such things.
So I was yeah, no, so it was interesting. I was it was terrible. I had to go and spend a week in Australia. I extended a bit, and it was sunny and it was awful, but someone had to do it. But talking to them out there, fascinating. That grass is always greener. Talk to the healthcare professionals. I was talking to chief executives and to members of the government as well as clinicians. And actually, the health service in Australia is in a worse state than here. They are so financially challenged. They have absolutely no money. So I suspect people who go out there will find that the grass is not as greener. But I think your point about retaining them and making some of that comes back to actually, looking after our workforce, loving our workforce, recognising our workforce. How Jonathan's much better qualified than me to answer this, but the problem with trainees for me as a chief executive, when I say to the medical students or to the trainees, I say, where do you work? They don't say I work for Sherwood Hospital or Sherwood Forest Hospitals. They're pretty faceless who they work for. They don't have any ownership of that organisation. If I give them a locker, a decent mess, some car parking, and lo and behold, some hot food at night, they're pretty happy. They don't need much. And say thank you a few times to them. So we've lost a lot of that. Sorry, Jonathan.
Without prolonging the PA debate, what I would say is that when we survey junior doctors or residents around PAs, the ones that object the most are the ones that have not had any contact with PAs. If you actually extract out from those surveys, there are very few, and there aren't many PAs around actually when you think about it, so most doctors have never ever come in contact with them. When you extract out the very few that have, they're a lot more positive about PAs. And I think it's, if you look back through the history of medicine, so many things that used to only be done by doctors, like we now have nurse endoscopists. I mean, the whole history of medicine is about people who aren't doctors doing more and more. So it's about how you train them. It's about the management, making sure they're not working outside their scope of practice. But I don't think that having PAs as itself as a profession is a problem.
It is also about valuing the doctors themselves.
Yeah, well, exactly.
And
David said that's lots of other things around that we're trying to address. Could go on for a little bit longer, but quite a few doctors end up in coroner's courts for similar reasons.
Right, any more questions from anyone? If not, I'm going to call on Professor Walker to give a vote of thanks, David.
This is very easy because you've demonstrated, David, that trained in knowledge.
You're a clinician who grew up and gained your postgraduate training in Nottingham. You then led Nottingham in many ways, and now leading in Mansfield, and you're now influencing national agenda. You're wearing a suit, a tie, and you've given us great respect. It reminds me of a lecture I had in 1975 by Ivan Illich, who came to visit us in Nottingham and explain his book Medical Nemesis, which I think I did buy a copy, so he must have been delighted. And he pointed out that the exponential rise in healthcare activity in our 60s, and I was then 21 or 22, would mean that every conversation between doctors in that period of time will be dominated by trying to control this exponential rise in healthcare costs. And you've demonstrated that today. And I wish you well in your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.